Okay, so now that we know how to click and select objects and move them around, rotate them, scale them, in general, transform them either by using the mouse or entering values manually, now we're going to get into sort of a bit more of object creation. And again, if you're interested in playing around with dragging objects in and moving them around, I encourage you to go down to the props folder and check that out and drag in a few objects. Like, for example, this chair. If you want to drag it in, you'll see that dragging it in, it snaps automatically to the floor, and you can hit the E key and rotate it around, and you can drag in the chair and a couch and other things, and you can create a scene if you want to. So check that out if you're interested. We're going to get into level creation in the near future, so I'm going to go ahead and delete those, and just know that it's as simple as dragging objects in and moving them around. And now that you have the tools necessary to do that, you know how to do so. So now I'm going to get back to this idea of actors. So I mentioned to you at one point, or multiple, that every object in the world that you can place inside of the world is an actor. So if I select this cube over here, this cube is an actor, and these other boxes here are actors. This ball here is an actor, and the floor is an actor. Even these invisible collision volumes here are actors. So everything that you can possibly place in the level is an actor, and we can create our own actors and place them in the level. Now, these meshes here, and typically things that don't warp or animate, we call them static meshes because they're static. Even though you can move them around in the world, and even they can be knocked around in the game, they're still considered static because they don't animate, they don't warp or change their shape throughout the game. These are static meshes, and we typically refer to them as static mesh actors because they can be brought in. But we can create our own actors, and actors are the basis for game creation in Unreal Engine, so we're going to create our own actor. And to do that, what I'd like to do is, first of all, I'm going to close all these little drop downs for the folders in our content browser. And by the way, if you don't have this side menu here, again, this little icon here that says show or hide the sources panel, I clicked that to open it. So click that if you want this open like I have. Now I'm going to click on the content folder here, and in this little gray area I can right click and click new folder, and I can call this one blueprints. And I called it blueprint, but if I click it and change the name, I can rename it to blueprints. Now, this is placed in the content folder, and I can double click it, or I can click over here and click on blueprints, and now we have a folder for our own blueprints that we can create. And I'm going to show you the creation of a blueprint and exactly what it is now. So if I right click in any folder, and in my case I'm in the blueprints folder, not the content folder itself, you'll see that if I right click, I can create new things. We created a new folder, but I can also create a bunch of different types of assets. And the basic type of asset that I'm going to introduce to you now is the blueprint. So you'll see the blueprint class. If I click on that, you'll see that the blueprint is basically a thing that we can create, and it can be inherited from a parent class. And typically the most basic type of blueprint that we can create is the actor. And the pawn, character, player controller, game mode, actor component, and scene component, these are all different types of blueprints that we can create. And you'll see next to them there are descriptions that explain a little bit about what they are, but we're going to get into all that very soon. For now, we just want to create a basic actor. And if you hover over it, it shows you a whole bunch of information, and you can read that if you like. But for now, we're just going to click on actor, and you'll see that it creates a new asset. It's a blueprint, and its name is highlighted, so we can actually rename this what we want to name it. And I'm going to call this my actor because this is just a basic actor that we're going to use to introduce ourselves to what actors are. Now, an actor is a thing that can be placed in the world, and that's in the most basic sense what an actor is. And since it can be placed in the world, again, placing objects in the world is as easy as clicking and dragging them in, and you'll see that as soon as I drag one into the world, it's now in the world, it snaps to the floor, and here in the world outliner you'll see my actor here, and so that allows us to select it and zoom in on it. If you want to hit the F key, you'll zoom in, we can rotate around it and take a look at it, and so on. Now this actor is basically empty. It doesn't have a mesh on it. It doesn't have anything to represent it in the game. And if we were to press play and maneuver our ball over to where we dragged it in, you'll see that we can't even really see it because there's not really anything there to see. So I'm going to hit escape to get out of it. You'll see here's our actor, and you'll see that it's got a little white circle here that allows us to click and select it. And that's sort of what that circle is for. It's sort of an icon to show us that there's an actor here, even though there's no mesh or anything else. That little circle here shows us that there's something there. And so that's kind of what allows us to see that there's an actor. Now, this actor is, like I said, it's an object that can be placed in the world, but that's just about it. There's nothing else in the actor, nothing that it contains like a mesh or anything like that. And so we can change that by giving it some different properties, some qualities that can make this more interesting than just some invisible object in the world. And so to edit this, we can open its blueprint. And to do so, we can double click on the icon, and it loads up with this new blueprint menu system, and this is the My Actor blueprint. And you'll see that up here it's got its own tab. If we want, we can click and drag and release, and now it's got its own window. And we can click on the little tab here and dock it up next to the level tab, and now we can switch between the level and the actor. So here we see the actor, and you'll see that up here with an asterisk next to its name, that means we can save it. And in general, if we take a look down in the content browser, the icon has an asterisk, and that means that it needs to be saved. So if we ever change something with an actor or a blueprint in general, we can see that it needs to be saved because the changes haven't been saved, and that asterisk tells us that. So we can actually save it here. We got a save button in the toolbar. It's got its own toolbar in the blueprint. Or we can come over to Save All and click Save All. And if we click Save All, you'll see this pop-up that shows the things that have changed that we're saving, and we can click Save Selected. So that's how you save it. So this is the actor, and again, inside of its own little viewport here, you'll see this little white sphere or little icon, and that just shows you that that this is an actor, that there's the center, it's got its own little origin here, and it's got a little grid here showing sort of units, and you can sort of maneuver your way around inside of this little world. And you can kind of notice, it's a little hard to see, but you can kind of notice that this line here is sort of green, and then this line here fades into a red, and that kind of is a hint at the axis. Its own local axis is in this direction. It's got it's Y, X, and then up and down is the Z, and you can see down here at the bottom left, it's got its own X, Y, Z axes that change when you look around in the world. Okay, so we've got a actor. It doesn't have anything in it, and in order to give it a sort of visual representation in the world, we can add a component to it. Now, actors have a tab over here called the Components tab, and the Components tab is a list of all the components associated with the actor. So a component is like a object that the actor owns. It's like a sub-object of the actor. And so if, right now, if you create a new actor, it doesn't really have anything in there. It does have a root component, and we're going to get to what root components are very shortly, but it doesn't have a mesh. It doesn't have anything really very interesting. So we can give it a mesh by giving it a component. So if we go up to Add Component, click on that and type in static, you'll see that we have static mesh here. And if we select that, we have a static mesh component added, and we can actually rename this. And if we want, we can call this mesh component, something like that. And now we have a mesh. Now you don't really see anything appear here because this mesh component, even though it's been added, we need to select what mesh asset this component has. So a mesh component has its own details panel, and it has a section called static mesh. And for the static mesh basically property here, we can click on a drop down and select a mesh for this actor. And in this, when you click on the drop down, it shows you a list of all the static meshes in this project that we have to choose from. And so we can choose anything we want. And if I click on shape cone, for example, then all of a sudden a big cone is shows up in the editor, and now this actor has its own mesh component. And for the mesh component, its static mesh property has been set to the cone, and now we have a cone. And so you'll see that as soon as we changed something, the asterisk showed up, so we can click save if we want to save it. But before we hit save, I want you to notice that this compile here has turned to a question mark icon. Now, compiling is sort of basically getting every change that we've made sort of sorted out and ready for the computer to execute. And so if we click compile, you'll see down here in the compiler results, compile of my actor successful. And basically every time you make a change, compilation is something that that you can either do manually, or you can just click save and it'll compile for you. But this more has to do with when you're programming. When you write a program in some sort of computer language, some programming language like C++, for example, compiling is what takes those commands and translates them into a language that the computer can understand. So when we do things like add a cone or change this blueprint, under the scenes, behind the scenes, under the hood, there is code that corresponds to what we're doing, and compiling is translating that into machine language so that it's understandable by the engine when we press play. So this compilation button is more something that we had to really worry about with previous versions of Unreal Engine, but now it's kind of done automatically. So if it needs to be compiled, if we go back in and hit play, typically compilation is done automatically for us. So we can hit play, and you'll see that we've got this cone here in the world. That's our actor, and so now it's got a visual representation. So that's how you add a mesh to an actor, and basically, you know, now that we have this my actor, which has a cone, we can move it around in the world. We can drag in more cones, and so basically the blueprint is kind of like the prototype. It's, you know, it's named blueprint because, you know, it's kind of like when you're building a house. You need a blueprint so that you can build a house, but once you've made that blueprint, you can make multiple houses, and each house is based on that blueprint as a sort of prototype or set of instructions for creating that actor. And so now that we have a blueprint for my actor, we can drag as many as we want into the world, and we can hit play, and we have multiple versions of the my actor. We call these instances. So each one of these is an instance of the my actor. So it's pretty easy to create a new actor, give it a mesh component, and then drag them in the world and run into them, bump into them, use them as obstacles or whatever. And then, of course, you have all the options that we covered in previous videos as far as scaling them. You can hit the R key and scale it up if you want to. You can warp it in the Z direction and make it a more spiky cone. You can bring it down and make it a very flat cone. You can scale it in different dimensions. You can hit E to rotate it. And, you know, all those things that we learned in previous videos, you can do that to these because they are objects in the world. So I'm going to go ahead and delete a couple of these, and I'll go ahead and leave one cone in the world so that we can continue working with our actor in future videos.